In this video about the movie Avengers, Age of Ultron, we will discuss the storylines, summarize the plot, and explore the cast and characters. Additionally, we will cover the movie's production details and box office performance. Finally, we will provide reviews and share personal reactions. So, let's get started. Avengers, Age of Ultron dominated the domestic box office for a second weekend, pulling in an additional $77 million for a North American total of $312 million. The Marvel film outperformed the Sofia Vergara comedy Hot Pursuit, which earned $13 million in the domestic market, according to box office tracker Ringtrack. Despite its domestic success, Age of Ultron did not appear to be on track to break the box office record set by its 2012 predecessor, The Avengers. The original movie earned $103 million during its second weekend, dropping from its enormous $207 million opening weekend. Age of Ultron also delivered strong performances at the foreign box office, picking up $68 million overseas for an international total of $562 million. Here's how the top 5 films rounded out. The Age of Adeline brought in $5.6 million, and Furious 7 earned $5.2 million. However, Age of Ultron failed to surpass the record-breaking opening of the original The Avengers, which earned $207 million when it debuted in 2012. The weekend's second biggest film, The Age of Adeline, took in $6.3 million. The Marvel-Disney film ranked number 1 in the UK last weekend and had earned $681 million worldwide so far. The superhero team, including Robert Downey Jr. and Jeremy Renner, returned to save the Earth from the villainous robot Ultron, voiced by James Spader. It was always going to be tough to top the first movie, an exhibitor relations analyst told AFP. The first film had the novelty of bringing all the superheroes together in one movie, which we had not seen before. So it did not have that advantage this time. However, the film still faced little competition, with no other movies making more than $12 million. The fantasy drama The Age of Adeline placed second. Welcome to Tales from the Box Office, our column that examines box office successes, disasters, and everything in between, as well as what we can learn from them. How do you make something bigger than one of the biggest movies of all time? In 2012, director Joss Whedon explained how he approached the sequel to The Avengers. Instead of simply trying to make it bigger, he aimed to make it smaller, more personal, and more painful, focusing on what should naturally happen next for the characters rather than repeating what worked the first time. The Avengers earned more than $1.5 billion at the global box office in 2012, trailing only James Cameron's Titanic and Avatar on the list of highest-grossing films at the time of its release. The pressure was on the director to deliver a satisfying follow-up. However, at least initially, he did not want to fall into the trap of assuming that bigger automatically meant better. Avengers, Age of Ultron was a major moment for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Avengers, Age of Ultron arrived at a time when Marvel Studios was coming off the massive box office success of The Avengers, which had redefined blockbuster filmmaking and earned more than $1.5 billion worldwide. The eyes of the world were on the director's follow-up. Although the sequel was hugely successful on paper, it also taught Marvel a crucial lesson moving forward. In the book The Story of Marvel Studios, The Making of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it is explained that the critical reception to Age of Ultron was noticeably less enthusiastic than the reaction to The Avengers. Many viewers consider Age of Ultron to be one of Marvel's more underrated movies, but it is impossible to deny that the response was more mixed. There are parts of the film where one might feel it could have been better. However, there are also parts that feel exactly as they needed to be. When looking at the conflicts within the story, it is clear that the movie expresses everything it was trying to say. The book explains that producers at Marvel Studios were honestly exhausted during the process, and there was no ill will toward director Joss Whedon regarding the final result. Avengers, Age of Ultron earned more than $1.4 billion at the box office, but it felt as though Marvel had narrowly avoided a bigger issue. Creatively, Marvel later emphasized that every sequel needed a strong and solid reason to exist. While a profitable sequel might be enough for another studio to approve a follow-up to a major hit, Marvel Studios took a different approach. They doubled their efforts to ensure that future sequels were driven by meaningful storytelling and not just spectacle. In more recent years, Marvel has struggled with some sequels. The Marvels finished its run as one of the lowest-grossing MCU movies ever. Captain America: Brave New World also struggled at the box office in 2025. However, at least on paper, there has generally been a justifiable reason for nearly every sequel since Age of Ultron, regardless of how they performed commercially or how they were received. Avengers: Infinity War and Avengers: Endgame clearly had strong narrative reasons to exist. It is also easy to see why Sam Wilson deserved a solo Captain America film in Captain America: Brave New World. The Guardians of the Galaxy sequels carried significant emotional weight, and Black Panther: Wakanda Forever served as a tribute to Chadwick Boseman's legacy. In many ways, Age of Ultron appears to be a turning point for the studio. Superhero fans love to imagine what-if scenarios. What if a certain comic book movie had been made? What if a different actor had been cast in a major role? However, among the endless possibilities, there are also several cancelled comic book movies that many people are glad were never produced. Why? Not because anyone can see the future, but because based on the available information and the people involved in those projects, the chances of success seemed minimal at best. If proven wrong, some critics might even jokingly accept punishment for doubting them. Let's be honest. Who is really asking for a multiple-man movie starring James Franco? Or what about Silver and Black, which sounded like a mix of Madame Web and Morbius rolled into one? Some projects simply did not inspire confidence in the future of the comic book movie genre. The year 2004, however, proved to be a special one for the comic book movie genre. It was a year in which two of the greatest superhero films ever made were released. The year 2004 was especially significant for superhero films, as both Spider-Man 2 and The Incredibles were released. That same year, Warner Brothers approached comedian Robert Smigel to write a Green Lantern film that would have starred Jack Black. As soon as news of the project reached the internet, fans quickly made their opinions known to Warner Brothers, politely, of course. Many online comic book fans strongly opposed the idea, believing it was completely misguided. The film was reportedly written as a comedy, with the Green Lantern ring malfunctioning and mistakenly choosing a reality TV star named Jay instead of Hal Jordan. It is difficult to determine how this version of the film would have performed. If the Green Lantern elements had been removed, it might have worked as a fun comedy. However, as a Green Lantern adaptation, it would likely have faced serious criticism. In 2007, Dwayne Johnson was cast as Black Adam, a character who was also expected to appear in a Shazam movie. However, that project went through numerous delays. It took so long to materialize that it felt as though years had passed before Black Adam was finally released in 2022. While Johnson struggled to bring Black Adam to the screen, he was reportedly offered another superhero role in 2012. The actor confirmed online rumors about the possibility of playing Lobo, with Brad Payton said to be working on the project. It is not difficult to imagine Johnson as the main man. He is muscular, charismatic, and certainly has the physical presence for the role. However, considering that Jason Momoa and Jeffrey Dean Morgan were also popular fan choices for Lobo, many questioned whether Johnson was the right fit. Johnson often produces entertaining but somewhat shallow action films, and some wondered whether that approach was what DC needed while trying to build its own cinematic universe. Long before Robert Downey Jr. suited up as Iron Man and launched the most successful shared cinematic universe in film history, there were earlier plans for an Iron Man movie. After working on Smallville and Spider-Man 2, writers Alfred Gough and Miles Miller were approached by producer Avi Arad and Kevin Feige about developing a script for Iron Man. Although the writers admitted they were not deeply familiar with the character, they saw it as an opportunity to create a superhero film that was not centered on a teenager. They completed a script and attempted to move the project forward at New Line Cinema, but the studio ultimately declined to proceed. This was around 2005. Actor Nicolas Cage later confirmed that he had been approached to play Iron Man but chose to walk away from the project. He explained that when he commits to something, he wants to do it properly and ensure it will be meaningful. An Iron Man film written by Goff and Miller and starring Nicolas Cage does not sound like the worst idea in the world. However, history ultimately took a different path, one that led to Robert Downey Jr.'s iconic portrayal and the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In fact, if that earlier version of the film had gone into development, the Tony Stark we know today might never have existed. Have you ever looked at the price of a gas station sandwich and thought, wow, that's cheap? Canon Films likely believed they could make a movie for even less. At one point, Canon Films nearly turned Spider-Man into a reality after Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus acquired the film rights for $225,000, along with additional costs and time commitments. According to filmmakers involved in the project, Golan and Globus did not fully understand the source material. They reportedly believed Spider-Man was similar to a Wolfman character, which led to some very unusual creative decisions. At one stage, writers proposed a storyline in which Peter Parker would physically transform into a giant human spider or lizard-like monster, because why not? Although the canon Spider-Man film never came to fruition, a promotional trailer was created and can still be found online. The production quality appeared extremely low budget, and many felt that even children's costumes looked more convincing. The film would likely have been made as cheaply as possible, as Canon's unofficial motto seemed to be prioritizing budget over quality. Thankfully, this version was never developed. It serves as an example of what can happen when a studio misunderstands a comic book property and attempts to shape it into something designed purely for mass market appeal without respecting the original character. Not every questionable comic book adaptation failed at the box office, however. Despite receiving poor reviews, Daredevil performed strongly, earning $79 million against a $78 million budget. Because of that financial success, a sequel was seriously considered. In 2003, writer-director Mark Steven Johnson discussed the possibility of adapting Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Born Again storyline or Kevin Smith's Guardian Devil for a darker sequel. In 2004, Ben Affleck expressed a similar interest, saying he would consider returning to the role if the sequel took a much darker direction. Ultimately, the idea was abandoned. In hindsight, this may have been a wise decision. At that time, before The Dark Knight changed the landscape of comic book films, studios such as 20th Century Fox were unlikely to fully commit to a mature and dramatically darker superhero sequel. If you are looking for the cinematic equivalent of throwing ideas at the wall to see what sticks, look no further than Sony's attempts to build its own Spider-Man universe. After witnessing the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Sony tried to create a similar interconnected franchise using its catalog of Spider-Man-related characters. The problem was that many of these characters were not strong enough to support solo films. Still, as the MCU continued producing billion-dollar hits, Sony moved forward aggressively with its own universe plans. At one point, the studio hired Gina Prince-Bythewood to write and direct Silver and Black, a team-up film featuring Silver Sable and Black Cat. However, by 2018, Sony decided to cancel Silver and Black in favor of developing separate standalone films for each character. Judging by the results of Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven the Hunter, there is little doubt that Silver and Black might also have turned into a disappointing corporate project. Some studios simply struggle to handle superhero properties effectively. When you think of Marvel's mutants, the first names that come to mind are usually Wolverine, Professor X, Jean Grey, Storm, or perhaps Gambit. One name that certainly would not appear in a top 10 or even top 20 list is Jamie Madrox, also known as Multiple Man, a character who can duplicate himself. In 2017, reports revealed that Alan Heinberg was writing a script for a Multiple Man movie, with James Franco attached to produce and star in the project. It was part of 20th Century Fox's broader plan to expand the X-Men universe, especially since Deadpool had become an unexpected financial success for the studio. Executives likely looked at a list of mutant characters and decided that Multiple Man could be the next spin-off. However, the project was ultimately halted due to Disney's acquisition of Fox, along with later allegations involving James Franco. In the end, very few people seemed disappointed that the film never moved forward, except perhaps a small group of dedicated multiple-man fans. Not every comic book character needs a film or television series, a lesson that several studios and networks have learned in recent years. In a previous discussion about the best superhero teams from Marvel and DC, Alpha Flight was sometimes mentioned with a bit of skepticism. There is no intention to mock the Canadian superhero team, but they have never been among the most popular comic book groups. Interestingly, in 2017, producer Simon Kinberg spoke to comicbook.com about potential expansion plans for the X-Men universe. He mentioned exploring various characters, from Deadpool to the New Mutants to the mainline X-Men films, and even possibly X-23. He also referred to other teams, seemingly including Alpha Flight, although he accidentally called them X-Flight during the interview. Everyone makes mistakes, and it is possible the name simply slipped his mind. Still, the fact that the group was not immediately memorable says a great deal about its mainstream recognition. It is difficult to imagine a major studio successfully launching an Alpha Flight franchise. Before Christopher Nolan took control of the Batman franchise in the mid-2000s, director Darren Aronofsky had his own vision for a Batman film. He wanted to adapt Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Batman, Year One, and even enlisted Miller to help develop the script. The proposed film would have been darker and grittier than the source material itself. That sounds exciting, so why is this considered one of the cancelled comic book movies that some are glad was never made? The studio and Aronofsky reportedly had creative differences regarding the direction of the project. Ultimately, the film did not move forward, and the studio chose a different path for the character, one that eventually led to Christopher Nolan's critically acclaimed trilogy. I remember thinking we were making two completely different films. That quote reflected the creative tension between director Darren Aronofsky and Warner Brothers. At the time, the studio was still recovering from the failure of Batman and Robin, which starred George Clooney and was widely criticized. Warner Brothers wanted a safer, more traditional version of Batman, while Aronofsky envisioned something far darker and more unconventional. There were even discussions about casting a surprising choice for the role of Batman. While no disrespect is intended toward the actor, nothing about that potential casting truly embodied the Dark Knight. It felt like another example of trying to force a square peg into a round hole. When Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 was released in 1993, it became clear that the franchise was losing momentum. Plans for a fourth film were eventually considered, and at one point it was even greenlit. Several drafts were developed, including versions by different writers, but the project never moved forward. Very little is known about the unproduced fourth Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film, apart from concept art that later surfaced through auctions. The design suggested the return of the Shredder, a new female turtle named Kirby, and updated versions of characters like Casey Jones and the Foot Clan. While some of these ideas hinted at interesting story possibilities, the franchise had clearly painted itself into a corner due to creative decisions made in the previous installment. By the late 1990s, the Ninja Turtles did not need another sequel, they needed a reboot. Fortunately, that is eventually what happened. Before James Gunn and Peter Safran were announced as the new leaders of DC Studios at Warner Brothers, the DC Cinematic Universe was in a state of confusion. There was no clear direction, and it was often unclear which projects connected to one another or what long-term plan was in place. The franchise lacked a cohesive vision. What DC truly needed was a course correction and stronger, more focused storytelling, not simply more superhero projects added to the mix without a plan. If proof is needed, consider the idea of Green Lantern 2. Yes, a sequel to the 2011 Green Lantern film was once in development. The original movie was intended to launch a major DC cinematic universe, but its disappointing box office performance and negative reviews forced Warner Brothers to reconsider their strategy. Despite its struggles, there were still discussions about continuing the franchise. However, given the weak reception of the first film, many questioned whether a sequel would have made sense. It is difficult to imagine a follow-up correcting all the issues of the original while still maintaining audience interest. In the end, Green Lantern 2 became another cancelled comic book movie that few people truly missed. Bringing back the same writers for a sequel would likely not have improved the outcome. The previous interpretations simply did not work. In situations like that, it is often better to move forward rather than attempt to patch over major flaws where a coherent storyline should have been. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not every villain has been killed or erased from existence. Some have instead ended up behind bars. Several dangerous enemies have been sent to the Raft, a high-security supermax prison located in the middle of the ocean near Rikers Island. The facility was first introduced in Captain America: Civil War, where the heroes who opposed the Sokovia Accords were captured and imprisoned there, only to later be freed by Steve Rogers. The Raft has since housed a number of powerful and unstable individuals, raising the question of whether a prison break could eventually occur. After his very public, gamma-fueled transformation in Captain America: Brave New World, Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, now the Red Hulk, accepted responsibility for his actions. Portrayed by Harrison Ford, Ross chose to surrender himself, acknowledging that he had become a danger to the public. By the end of the film, he willingly submits to imprisonment at the Raft. In the comics, Red Hulk was originally introduced as a major enemy of the Hulk before eventually becoming more of an anti-hero. He even spent time as a member of the Avengers. With that history in mind, there is always a possibility that Ross could return in a different capacity in the future. When asked about the character's potential return, Harrison Ford expressed hope that there might be a story allowing Ross to evolve beyond simply being a monster. However, the direction of the character ultimately depends on the broader plans of the MCU. While Ross accepted his imprisonment as a noble decision, another villain in Brave New World may have had entirely different intentions. Samuel Stearns, also known in the comics as the Leader, is portrayed as a brilliant but manipulative mastermind. In the film's post-credit scene, it is revealed that he has been sent to prison as well. However, given his intelligence and long-term planning, it is possible that his capture was part of a larger strategy. In Marvel Comics, the Leader is known for orchestrating complex schemes and manipulating events from behind the scenes. It would not be surprising if imprisonment were merely another move in a greater plan. There is always the possibility that he could gather resources, allies, or influence from within prison, setting the stage for future conflicts in the MCU. Another major villain who experienced both imprisonment and temporary freedom is Helmut Zemo. Introduced in Captain America: Civil War, Zemo became one of the MCU's most effective antagonists by turning the Avengers against each other. After his capture, he later returned in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where he briefly worked alongside Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes. However, Zemo's time outside prison was short-lived. He was eventually returned to the Raft to continue serving his sentence. With so many powerful villains currently imprisoned rather than eliminated, the possibility of a large-scale prison break in the Marvel Cinematic Universe remains an intriguing idea for future storylines. The initial theory was that a former Sokovian character would eventually lead the Thunderbolts, similar to how the team operates in the comics. However, as the film's release approached, there were still no clear signs of that direction, which disappointed some fans, especially since Daniel Bruhl has expressed interest in returning as Baron Zemo in the MCU. Speaking of potential returns, in 2024 Bruhl discussed the possibility of reprising his role. Zemo may be imprisoned, but he is certainly not gone. Much like characters in Daredevil, Born Again, the MCU appears to be reconnecting with its street-level heroes and villains, including those from the Defenders saga. One villain who caused major problems was Willis Stryker, also known as Diamondback. After gaining enhanced abilities to rival Luke Cage in Harlem, he was eventually captured and imprisoned. In the series, it was revealed that he was Luke Cage's half-brother and had framed him for crimes. Unfortunately, like many characters from Marvel's Netflix-era shows, there has been no official confirmation about whether he will return to the MCU. While some characters remain unconfirmed, others may reappear when the time is right. If you are a regular moviegoer, you have probably seen Avengers, Age of Ultron, which performed extremely well at the box office. Writer-director Joss Whedon had the difficult task of crafting a sequel to one of the highest-grossing films of all time. Following such a massive success was always going to be challenging. As expected, the sequel aimed to be even bigger. The film is packed with characters, action sequences, and large-scale battles. Because of that, some viewers felt that the ending left a few emotional threads unresolved. Still, the conclusion clearly set the stage for the next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's break down the ending of the film, spoilers ahead. By the end of Age of Ultron, the original Avengers team has partially disbanded. A new lineup is formed, including Scarlet Witch, War Machine, Falcon, Vision, and Black Widow, with Captain America serving as the team's leader. Tony Stark steps away to live a quieter life, and Thor departs to investigate the mysterious Infinity Stones. The film revolves heavily around the Mind Stone, which had previously been housed inside Loki's scepter. The stone is eventually used to bring Vision to life. In the broader MCU, the Infinity Stones, space, mind, reality, power, soul, and time serve as powerful cosmic artifacts that become central to the overarching storyline. One of the most significant moments comes in the mid-credits scene, when the purple alien warlord Thanos appears. He retrieves a gauntlet and declares that he will handle matters himself. This gauntlet is known in the comics as the Infinity Gauntlet, a device capable of harnessing the power of all 6 Infinity Stones. Thor's storyline in Age of Ultron suggests that the appearance of so many powerful objects is no coincidence. He begins to suspect that someone is manipulating events behind the scenes. However, the mid-credits scene raises more questions than answers. When the Infinity Gauntlet was previously seen in Thor, it was displayed in Odin's vault. So how did Thanos obtain one? Was it the same gauntlet, or a different version? Later interviews revealed that the MCU actually features 2 gauntlets, the one in Odin's vault is right-handed, while the one Thanos picks up is left-handed. This detail helped set up the larger conflict that would unfold in Avengers: Infinity War. When Thanos first appeared at the end of the original Avengers film, many assumed he would immediately become the main villain of the sequel. Instead, his storyline was carefully built up over multiple films, leading to one of the most ambitious crossover events in cinematic history. There was never any real disguise about Thanos' presence, but at the time he was sometimes presented as distant and not particularly threatening. Many assumed that he would receive much deeper character development in Phase 3. Some even wondered whether introducing him so early, at the end of the Avengers, was a case of Marvel moving too quickly. Once Avengers: Infinity War was officially announced as a 2-part event, it became clear that Thanos would finally step into the spotlight. Fans expected that his full arc would unfold there, and fortunately, it did. Between Age of Ultron and Infinity War, several Marvel films were released, gradually building toward that massive confrontation. Although not every film directly focused on the Infinity Stones, the overarching narrative steadily moved in that direction. With Thanos actively hunting the stones, the stage was clearly being set for a larger conflict. Avengers: Age of Ultron ultimately served as a major transitional chapter for the MCU. It acted as a send-off for certain character dynamics while laying the groundwork for Phase 3. The scope of the film was enormous, but the events that followed would become even bigger. While Age of Ultron is not always considered the most memorable MCU installment, it contains several important plot details that later gained deeper meaning. One of the most significant sequences involves Scarlet Witch using her powers to give several Avengers disturbing visions. Thor experiences a vision connected to Asgard and its destruction. This moment foreshadows the events of Thor: Ragnarok, where Hela, the goddess of death, ultimately destroys Asgard. In that film, Thor realizes that Asgard is not a place but its people, and he allows the realm to fall in order to save them. Steve Rogers envisions himself back in the 1940s, dancing with Peggy Carter. At the time, fans believed this was simply a painful reminder of the life he lost. However, in Avengers Endgame, Steve eventually travels back in time and lives out that quiet life with Peggy. The final scene of Endgame, showing them dancing together, mirrors the earlier vision. Tony Stark's vision is darker. He sees the Avengers defeated, lying lifeless after an alien invasion. He believes he has failed to protect the world. This haunting image foreshadows the devastating conflict with Thanos in Infinity War and Endgame, where Earth once again faces a massive extraterrestrial assault. Natasha Romanoff, however, does not see the future, she sees her past. Her vision takes her back to the Red Room, the brutal Russian training program that turned her into an assassin. In a tragic sense, her future mirrors her past. In Avengers Endgame, she sacrifices herself to obtain the Soul Stone, completing her redemption arc. Marvel later explored her backstory further in Black Widow, which delves deeper into her past as a Russian spy and assassin. Looking back, the visions in Avengers Age of Ultron were not random hallucinations. They were carefully planted seeds, subtle hints of what was to come. At the time, audiences may not have fully understood their significance, but in retrospect, they became powerful pieces of long-term storytelling within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This week's Marvel blog dives into the many Easter eggs and hidden details in Avengers Age of Ultron. Fans have long enjoyed spotting these subtle nods, and this movie is no exception. Press conferences and team lineups used to be a special event, but now, with Marvel films releasing more frequently, new cast announcements have become almost routine. A new movie and a new director are about as close as we get to that old excitement. It's worth noting that this film draws heavily from the Ultimate Universe. In the story, Faring quickly returns to working for King with hopes tied to the Infinity Stones. Captain America and Natasha remain pivotal members of the Avengers, which works well, although the plot quickly moves towards civil war and then into subsequent conflicts. The stakes are high. If Captain America falls in Civil War, we wouldn't get to see the exciting continuity that fans enjoy. Tony Stark has previously faced armored villains in the comics, and here he seems hesitant, perhaps keeping himself out of direct combat. This could set the stage for a cinematic version of Civil War, where tensions between teammates might feel more organic than turning on allies overnight. Meanwhile, Thor sets off to investigate the cause of mysterious disturbances linked to powerful artifacts appearing at the same time, unaware of the Guardians' involvement. The movie hints at the continued presence of Loki in future films. His logical first step would be to locate his brother and discover who granted him his powers. The story shows a character spending final moments with a loved one before vanishing, presumably into the ocean. While crossovers are limited, fans can hope for surprises. The narrative also explores the idea that Tony Stark, aware of the danger around him, could reappear when the world needs him most, potentially in Infinity War Part 2. This raises questions about Tony's allies and the choices made for character arcs, particularly given the significant resolution achieved in this film. It seems unusual to give a character a complete arc only to reset it in a sequel, but Marvel often balances multiple storylines across films. Finally, the post-credits sequences hint at the Infinity Gauntlet and its stones. So far, 4 of the 6 Infinity Stones have appeared in the Marvel Cinematic Universe: the Power Stone, Guardians of the Galaxy, the Space Stone, from Loki's capture in the Avengers, and others yet to be revealed. These setups promise major events to come in the ongoing saga. The dark wall that was previously the stone, formerly hosting Loki's scepter, is embedded in Vision, creating an obvious conflict leading into Infinity War. Infinity War partially concludes with the introduction of a new Avenger, seen at the end of Age of Ultron, who may require some of the old gods' assistance for reinforcement. By the end of the film, the heroes have defeated Ultron, and a new super-powered individual begins to emerge, though not without significant cost. After all, it was the Avengers who inadvertently created this threat, and all the resulting death and destruction is a consequence of that. Looking ahead, the heroes embark on new journeys, and the Avengers have once again taken a new form, with a different mission and base of operations. This raises questions about the future of the Avengers initiative and what lies ahead for the heroes who have long been part of the team. In the final chapter of Age of Ultron, Quicksilver dies heroically in the climactic battle against Ultron, and his sacrifice becomes a turning point. This solidifies his twin sister, Wanda Maximoff, Scarlet Witch, as a full-fledged member of the Avengers, alongside the newcomer Vision, a Mind Stone-powered hero who is committed to protecting life at all costs. While these additions bring the core roster closer to completion, both of the original 6 heroes ultimately go their separate ways by the end of the film. Tony Stark steps back from being the armored Avenger after the Ultron incident, and Clint Barton, Hawkeye, returns to his family, leaving 4 original Avengers. The remaining 2 spots are filled by proven allies, Sam Wilson, Falcon, and James Rhodey Rhodes, War Machine. The new Avengers roster after Age of Ultron includes Captain America, Black Widow, Falcon, War Machine, Scarlet Witch, and Vision. Vision essentially fills the role previously held by War Machine and Iron Man, while Falcon takes on a new version of the Hawk persona. Scarlet Witch brings unique, highly dangerous abilities that replace some of the team's previous power dynamics. This roster is different but maintains a balance of human versus otherworldly abilities, while also significantly increasing diversity. However, this particular lineup will not last long, as many of the characters introduced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are destined to play roles in Captain America: Civil War, along with new characters. By the time Avengers: Infinity War, 2018 to 2019, arrives, nearly every surviving hero will be involved in the 2-part event. It remains unclear who funds the new Avengers base in upstate New York, but according to Joe Russo, the story takes place a few months after the Thor: The Dark World battle, allowing time for the base to be established and for Wanda and Pietro's timeline to progress. Meanwhile, the ABC TV series hints at the continuing adventures of Nick Fury and Maria Hill following the events in Sokovia. The new Avengers headquarters provides a convenient location for the team to assemble whenever needed. Bruce Banner, Hulk, does not participate in Civil War, consistent with the comics, as he is on another planet, potentially reserved for a return in Infinity War. This also allows Marvel to retain Robert Downey Jr.'s contract flexibility for Phase 4. While many of Tony Stark's armored suits have been destroyed, he himself remains resilient. Much of Ultron's deception arises from Tony's own fears, which drive his actions throughout the film. By the end, the Avengers are established as a team that no longer depends entirely on Iron Man or his resources, though Tony's vigilance and fear of future threats remain central to his character. Despite his joke about capturing Captain America, Tony Stark is clearly going to continue developing technology to prevent another, potentially larger alien invasion. He may pursue this work outside of the Avengers, at least in some capacity. After all, this is exactly what his vision from Scarlet Witch was about, and it was this vision that initially drove him to create Ultron. The film also lays the groundwork for future storylines, particularly the events of Captain America: Civil War. It's easy to see how Stark will be brought back into conflict with Steve Rogers next year. The question arises, what impact will Ultron's actions have on the Civil War? For example, Clint Barton, Hawkeye, has a family and children, a storyline borrowed directly from the Ultimate Comics version of the Avengers. This plot device cleverly explains Hawkeye's absence from other Phase 2 events. Similar to Iron Man, Hulk, Bruce Banner can be conveniently reintegrated into the Avengers whenever necessary, without conflicting with Mark Ruffalo's acting schedule. If the MCU continues to draw from the Ultimate Comics version of Hawkeye, this could place his family in danger and reveal sides of the character audiences have never seen. Jeremy Renner has noted while promoting Age of Ultron that the Hawkeye portrayed in the film is closer to what was originally envisioned when he signed on, but that there are still secrets and storylines yet to be revealed. These elements simply could not be included in the first movie due to time constraints, though they remain a tantalizing part of his character's arc. Fans are encouraged to share their thoughts on the state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, its direction, and what they hope to see next. Other topics of interest can also be discussed, such as connections to the broader Marvel comics and potential post-credit sequences. Avengers: Age of Ultron stars Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, Chris Evans as Captain America, Mark Ruffalo as Hulk, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye, and introduces new heroes including Elizabeth Olsen as Scarlet Witch and Aaron Taylor Johnson as Quicksilver. They face off against Ultron, a terrifying technological villain bent on human extinction. Along the way, they encounter Vision, created from the Mind Stone and an artifact of Ultron's own design. The movie also sets the stage for future films, including Ant-Man, July 17, 2015. After recovering Loki's scepter, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner realize it can be used to create Ultron, a form of artificial intelligence. Avengers: Age of Ultron retains all the elements that made the first Avengers movie so enjoyable: thrilling action sequences, smart storytelling, and sparkling humor. The ending is filled with Easter eggs, nods to the comics, and hints of what's to come in the next phase of the MCU. The Avengers lineup is shaken up in this movie, continuing Marvel's tradition of introducing new rosters, which historically has been a big deal at press events. Nowadays, roster changes happen more frequently, keeping the team dynamic fresh and exciting for audiences. A new movie and a new director are as close as you get to a fresh start for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's worth noting that these films are heavily inspired by the Ultimate Universe, where many storylines, including Kang's rise and his attempts to collect the Infinity Stones, take cues from the comics. Captain America and Natasha's apparent absence or deaths in certain story arcs work well, but it also sets up the rapid succession of events leading into Civil War and Infinity War. For example, if Captain America were to die during Civil War, Tony Stark's actions, particularly wearing the Iron Man armor and engaging in battles, would have to be adjusted, as they were in the comics. This sets the stage for a potential movie adaptation of Civil War that could balance high-stakes drama with the emotional weight of former allies turning against one another, making it more palatable for audiences. The presence of multiple powerful artifacts at the same time is no coincidence, even though the Avengers themselves may not fully understand them. Guardians of the Galaxy and Loki's storylines hint that these cosmic elements will continue to intersect in future films. It's reasonable to expect that Loki will play a role in the next installment, perhaps seeking answers about who gave him the scepter. Meanwhile, Hulk spends his last moments on Earth speaking with his closest companions before disappearing, presumably into the ocean. While the chances of a Hawkeye crossover seem slim, one can hope that these post-credits sequences hint at new alliances forming. Even though some heroes appear to retire at the end of Age of Ultron, their reappearances in Civil War suggest that Marvel is carefully managing character arcs while keeping future stories open. The post-credits sequences also tease the Infinity Stones, 4 of which have already appeared in the MCU: the Power Stone, Guardians of the Galaxy, the Space Stone, Loki's Scepter in the Avengers, and the Reality Stone, Thor: The Dark World. The Mind Stone, previously housed in Loki's scepter, is now embedded in Vision, connecting directly to rumors about Infinity War and setting up the Avengers to call upon other powerful forces for reinforcements. Avengers: Age of Ultron is noteworthy because it not only assembles heroes in new directions but also lays the groundwork for the next phase of the MCU. By the end of the film, the Avengers have defeated Ultron, new superpowered beings have emerged, and the story hints at future challenges, but not without significant cost. After all, it was the Avengers themselves who inadvertently created this new danger, and they must now face the consequences. As for what's next, the heroes are on new journeys, and the Avengers have once again taken on a new form with a fresh objective and a new base of operations. This raises questions about the future of the Avengers Initiative, S.H.I.E.L.D., and the heroes who have left the team. Going into the next chapter, audiences are left to wonder, what comes after Age of Ultron, and how will the team evolve? Quicksilver, Aaron Taylor Johnson, dies heroically in the final battle against Ultron in Sokovia, and his sacrifice becomes a turning point in the story. This solidifies his twin sister, Wanda Maximoff, Scarlet Witch, as a full-fledged member of the Avengers, alongside the newcomer Vision, who is powered by the Mind Stone and committed to protecting life at all costs. While these new additions strengthen the roster, 4 of the original 6 main heroes depart by the end of the film. Tony Stark steps away from being the team's armored Avenger after the Ultron incident, and Clint Barton, Hawkeye, returns to his family. This leaves 4 original members, with the remaining 2 slots filled by proven allies, Sam Wilson, Falcon, and James Rhodey Rhodes, War Machine. The new Avengers roster after Age of Ultron consists of Captain America, Black Widow, Falcon, War Machine, Scarlet Witch, and Vision. Vision essentially fills the role once held by War Machine and Iron Man, while Falcon takes on a new role as the team's aerial specialist. Scarlet Witch brings a unique but equally powerful skill set, replacing Hawkeye as the team's powerhouse. Although this roster is different, it maintains a balance of human versus otherworldly abilities, with a significant boost in diversity. This particular combination of 6 will not last long, as most of the characters introduced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are destined to play a role in Captain America: Civil War. New characters are also likely to join the team, including those from Ant-Man, 2015. It is unclear who finances the Avengers' new headquarters at the end of the film or who staffs it, but according to Joe Russo, the story takes place a few months after the Avengers, allowing time for the base to be fully operational. The facility appears to have full access to S.H.I.E.L.D. resources and does not rely on Stark Tower or Tony Stark's personal funding. The new base, which combines high-tech equipment with strategic infrastructure, is overseen by Black Widow and Captain America and even has its own fleet of S.H.I.E.L.D. vehicles and personnel. Boot camp and training exercises are ongoing at the base, ensuring readiness for future missions. The Avengers also face public scrutiny for their actions. First, Hulk loses control in a city, forcing Stark to deploy the Veronica's platform and the Hulkbuster armor to contain him and minimize civilian casualties. Maria Hill notes that these events make the Avengers responsible for significant destruction, putting them in the position of needing to go into hiding. Authorities may even pursue Banner for his role in these incidents. The second and more serious threat comes from Ultron himself. During the climactic battle in Sokovia, a portion of the city is lifted into the air as Ultron attempts to create a catastrophic event. The destruction and chaos are direct consequences of the Avengers' earlier decisions and actions. This storyline highlights a recurring theme in the MCU: even heroes with the best intentions can create dangerous consequences, raising questions about accountability and regulation of superpowered beings. These events set the stage for Captain America: Civil War, where the question of who monitors and controls superpowered heroes becomes central. The conflict between responsibility, oversight, and individual freedom begins here, making the Age of Ultron storyline one of the most compelling and influential arcs in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Vision, created with the Mind Stone, experiences visions that provide glimpses into other events happening across the universe, perhaps even the future. While it is unclear exactly how these visions occur or what he fully perceives, things become more complicated when Vision leaves to seek understanding of what he has seen. He encounters Wanda Maximoff, Scarlet Witch, and the next time they are together, they are at a mystical underground pool of water never before seen in the MCU, which is tied to Vision's abilities. Earlier sequences involving this magical water were cut from the theatrical release, leaving one of the largest plot gaps in the film. This pool, however, serves a narrative purpose. It informs Vision, the only Avenger with a deeper understanding of the universe, that the Infinity Stones are real and that 4 of them have surfaced in recent years. This mystical water is essentially a precursor to the Infinity War storyline in the comics. Avengers: Age of Ultron concludes on a notable and forward-looking note. The film takes the heroes into new directions, laying the groundwork for the next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. By the end, the Avengers have defeated Ultron, and new superpowered beings have emerged, but not without a significant cost. After all, it was the Avengers themselves who inadvertently created this threat, and they must face the consequences of the destruction and chaos caused. Looking ahead, the heroes embark on new journeys, and the Avengers have once again taken a new form, with a new mission and a new base of operations. This raises questions about the future of the Avengers Initiative, S.H.I.E.L.D., and the heroes who remain invested in the team. Quicksilver, Aaron Taylor Johnson, dies heroically in the final battle against Ultron in Sokovia, and his sacrifice becomes a turning point. This solidifies his twin sister, Wanda Maximoff, as a full-fledged Avenger, alongside the newcomer Vision, who is dedicated to protecting life at all costs. While these additions strengthen the team, 4 of the original 6 heroes depart by the end of the film. Tony Stark steps away from his role as the Armored Avenger after the Ultron incident, and Clint Barton, Hawkeye, returns to his family. This leaves 4 original members, with the remaining 2 slots filled by allies Sam Wilson, Falcon, and James Rhodey Rhodes, War Machine. The new Avengers roster after Age of Ultron represents a shift in dynamics while maintaining a balance of human and superhuman abilities, and adding greater diversity. This lineup, however, will not remain permanent, as most characters introduced in this phase of the MCU are destined to play roles in Captain America, Civil War and other upcoming films, including Ant-Man and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The release schedule for Phase 3, spanning titles such as Civil War, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Homecoming, Thor, Ragnarok, Black Panther, and the 2-part Avengers, Infinity War, has generated anticipation and excitement among fans. While superhero fatigue has occasionally been a concern, these films continue to invigorate the genre with humor, spectacle, and inventive storytelling. In Age of Ultron, the Avengers assemble under both Tony Stark and Steve Rogers' leadership, operating more like a strategic summit than a spontaneous team. At the same time, Stark experiments with artificial intelligence without consulting his teammates, creating Ultron, an AI designed to impose absolute power on Earth under the guise of defending it from all threats. This pivotal decision drives the central conflict of the film, highlighting the recurring MCU theme: even heroes with the best intentions can inadvertently create new dangers. In Avengers, Age of Ultron, a massive artificial intelligence program, visually resembling a floating blue jellyfish, becomes the terrifying and dangerous new enemy known as Ultron. Ultron assembles a robotic army and effectively becomes a warped reflection of his creator, Tony Stark. Using phrases like "peace in our time" to justify his plans, Ultron's worldview is both delusional and menacing. The film builds to a climactic, city-destroying confrontation, which, while familiar to fans of large-scale superhero battles, is carried off with striking visual flair and a sense of joy through Vision's presence. Vision brings a calm, almost evangelistic clarity to the chaos, providing moments of wonder and memorable lines that balance the destruction. The film also explores the unresolved romantic and sexual tension between Black Widow and Bruce Banner, which serves as a subtle narrative driving force. Even the more absurd elements are woven seamlessly into the story, giving the film its unique internal logic. Andy Serkis delivers a compelling performance as Ultron, bringing energy and menace to the character, while Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow combines her lethal skill set with charisma, adding another layer of excitement. Avengers: Age of Ultron marked a significant moment for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, arriving at a time when Marvel Studios felt the need to prove its staying power. Just 3 years earlier, the Avengers had redefined blockbuster filmmaking, grossing over $1.5 billion worldwide. Expectations for director Joss Whedon's follow-up were high, and while Age of Ultron was commercially successful, it received a more mixed critical response than its predecessor. Many critics and fans consider it one of Marvel's most underrated films, though it also struggled under the weight of multiple storylines and the challenge of balancing a large ensemble cast. In his book on the making of the MCU, Joss Whedon reflected candidly on the film. He acknowledged that there were parts he wished could have been improved, but he also felt that many elements were exactly where they needed to be. Despite the challenges of managing such a sprawling narrative, Age of Ultron pushed the universe forward, setting the stage for Captain America, Civil War and the subsequent Infinity Saga. Financially, the film was a major success, earning over $1.5 billion at the box office, proving that Marvel could continue to produce high-stakes, large-scale superhero epics while experimenting with tone, character dynamics, and cosmic storytelling. Though it was a complex film with a lot on its mind, it ultimately reinforced Marvel's dominance in the cinematic landscape and demonstrated that audiences were eager for more expansive storytelling. The book explains creatively that Marvel subsequently emphasized the need for every sequel to have a solid, justifiable reason to exist. In more recent years, Marvel has occasionally struggled with sequels. For example, Captain America, Brave New World underperformed at the box office in 2025, making it the lowest-grossing MCU movie at the time. However, since Age of Ultron, almost every sequel has had a clear narrative purpose. Regardless of commercial performance or critical reception, films like Infinity War and Endgame had compelling reasons to exist. Sam Wilson's solo Captain America film justified Brave New World, the Guardians of the Galaxy sequels carried enormous emotional weight, and Black Panther, Wakanda Forever served as a tribute to Chadwick Boseman's legacy. In retrospect, Age of Ultron marked a turning point, laying the groundwork for a more deliberate approach to MCU storytelling. The year 2024 proved especially significant for superhero cinema. Two of the best superhero films ever released, Spider-Man 2 and Incredible, showcased the genre's potential. That same year, Warner Bros. Approached comedian Rob Schneider to write a Green Lantern film starring Jack Black. Fans quickly expressed their concerns online, opposing the idea of turning the character into a comedic figure. The proposed story involved a reality TV star mistakenly inheriting the Green Lantern ring, fumbling through heroism in a manner reminiscent of Kung Fu Panda, but with Green Lantern in place of Pow. While it could have been a fun concept, fan backlash ensured the project did not move forward. Meanwhile, Dwayne Johnson was cast as Black Adam, initially slated to appear in a Shazam film before eventually starring in the standalone Black Adam released in 2022, which reshaped the character's narrative and powers. Johnson was also offered other superhero roles in the 2010s, including rumors of playing Silver Surfer, though these projects never materialized. Before the MCU was fully established, earlier attempts to create a shared superhero universe existed. In 2010, before Robert Downey Jr. solidified the MCU as Iron Man, plans were in motion for other superhero films, including projects related to Spider-Man 2. Writers and producers explored various concepts, some of which involved early ideas for Iron Man and other interconnected stories, demonstrating the iterative planning that eventually led to the successful, tightly knit cinematic universe we know today. In 2005, actor Tom Cruise confirmed to IGN that he had been approached to play Iron Man but ultimately walked away from the project. "They came to me at a certain point, and when I do something, I want to do it right," Cruise explained. "If I commit to something, it has to be done in a way that I know it's going to be something special. As it was lining up, it just didn't feel like it was going to work." At the time, the proposed Iron Man film reportedly involved elements like a cop storyline and unconventional training sequences, ideas that Cruise felt were misguided. Had this version of the film gone into development, Tony Stark as we know him might never have existed. The history of early superhero films is filled with similarly unusual and underfunded projects. Canon Films, for example, attempted a Spider-Man adaptation in the 1980s for a reported budget of just $225,000. Filmmakers Joss Whedon and others tried to adapt the character, but the studio misunderstood the source material, reportedly envisioning Spider-Man as a sort of Wolfman. Despite these efforts, the Canon Films Spider-Man project never came to fruition. A teaser trailer was eventually made and can still be viewed online, showing the limited production values of the time. Similarly, the Daredevil films experienced a rocky development history. Despite a poor critical reception, the first Daredevil, 2003, performed respectably at the box office, earning $179 million on a $78 million budget, prompting discussions of a sequel. Writers and directors, including Mark Steven Johnson and Frank Miller, explored potential storylines for Daredevil 2, such as Born Again, though Ben Affleck later expressed reluctance to reprise the role due to the darker material. In retrospect, this cautious approach was wise, as the landscape for mature superhero films was still uncertain at the time. Meanwhile, Sony attempted to establish its own Spider-Man cinematic universe, inspired by the success of the MCU. The studio sought to develop films based on Spider-Man-related characters, though many of these characters were not strong enough to carry standalone movies. At one point, Sony hired Gina Prince Bythewood to direct a Silver and Black film, a team-up featuring Silver Sable and Black Cat. However, challenges in developing compelling stories for these characters hindered progress. These early attempts highlight how the MCU's eventual success, driven by Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man and the shared universe strategy, represented a careful, deliberate approach that many previous studios had failed to execute. Where earlier films struggled with tone, budget, or understanding the source material, Marvel Studios' methodical planning allowed the MCU to thrive, creating a blueprint that would generate billions at the box office and redefine the superhero genre. By 2018, Sony decided to shelve Silver and Black in favor of standalone films for each character. Judging by the results of Morbius, Madam Web, and Gavin, there is little doubt that Silver and Black would have turned into a corporate, formulaic affair. Spider-Man fans know how the character should be handled, superheroes just don't work well in forced adaptations. While the idea of adapting Silver and Black wasn't inherently bad, it would have been difficult to execute the vision properly, and the project likely would have left audiences dissatisfied. After all, the Sony Spider-Man universe often struggles to elevate its characters beyond the surface-level Marvel mutants that audiences already love. When thinking of Marvel mutants, names like Professor X, Storm, or maybe Gambit immediately come to mind, characters with strong fan recognition. One character who wouldn't have suffered from lack of attention is Multiple Man. He is a mutant who can duplicate himself, making him a compelling and versatile character for a film. In 2017, news broke that Alan Heinberg was writing a script for a Multiple Man movie, in which James Franco would both produce and star. This was part of 20th Century Fox's broader plan to expand the X-Men universe, especially after Deadpool had become a massive financial success for the studio. Executives were likely looking through their roster of mutants and decided that Multiple Man should be next. However, two events prevented the film from moving forward: Disney's acquisition of Fox and allegations against James Franco a few years later. In the end, the only people who truly missed out were the relatively small number of Multiple Man fans who had hoped for a dedicated film. Not every character needs their own movie or TV show, something several studios and networks have learned in recent years. Back in 2017, producer Simon Kinberg discussed some of the planned directions for the X-Men universe with comicbook.com. He mentioned the future of existing characters, from Deadpool to potentially X-23, and teased other groups, such as Alpha Flight. While mistakes in recalling group names can happen, the lack of attention given to some of these characters reflects their lower prominence in the franchise. Similarly, in the Batman universe, several ambitious but ultimately cancelled projects never came to fruition. Before Christopher Nolan redefined The Dark Knight for Warner Bros., there was a planned adaptation of Frank Miller's Batman, Year One, with Miller himself enlisted to work on the script. The goal was to create a darker version of the story. While this sounds promising on paper, studio interference complicated matters. According to Juan Phoenix and Sophie Guy in a 2020 interview with Empire, Warner Bros. Wanted Prince to play the next Batman after the disappointing George Clooney-era Batman and Robin. Although Prince is a talented performer, his casting didn't align with the darker tone that the studio hoped for, making it a questionable choice for the role. It seemed like another attempt by Warner Bros. To fit a square peg into a round hole. In the early 1990s, a similar pattern occurred with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise. By the time TMNT 3 released in 1993, it was clear that the Turtles' popularity was fading. A fourth film was briefly greenlit, with multiple drafts produced, including versions by Christian Ford and Roger Soar, as well as Greg Shapiro and Johan Travis. Beyond Kevin Eastman's concept art, little is known about this unproduced TMNT installment. Before the announcement that James Gunn and Peter Safran would take charge of the new era of DC at Warner Bros., the cinematic universe was in a state of total confusion. Everything seemed chaotic, as no one knew what fit where or how it connected. One of the stranger films announced in 2022 was a project reportedly tied to Ghost of Trade for HBO Max. Could such an unusual film have worked? Absolutely, but it wouldn't have resolved the larger issues in the previous DC cinematic plans. It was clear that the DC universe needed a course correction. If you need proof, consider how Wonder Woman was announced in April 2022, only to be cancelled a month later. That alone shows how disorganized things were. One part of the studio didn't even know what the other was planning. Another canceled comic book movie we're glad never happened was a sequel to 2011's Green Lantern. The original film, starring Ryan Reynolds, was intended to launch the DC Extended Universe but failed at the box office and received poor reviews. Even if the sequel had made a modest profit, it would have only given audiences more of Reynolds' Hal Jordan in a CGI green suit, a situation unlikely to succeed given the original's reputation. It was always better to move on rather than attempt to patch an incoherent story. In a different corner of the superhero world, the Raft has become one of the most intriguing fictional locations. This high-security prison was introduced in Captain America: Civil War to detain those who violated the Sokovia Accords. Designed as a supermax facility in the middle of the ocean near Rikers Island, the Raft has held a variety of dangerous individuals, from failed politicians to financial war criminals. Following the events of Captain America: Brave New World, the prison has only grown more crowded, making it a perfect setting for potential stories about prison breaks or unexpected alliances. Here's a roll call of some notable inmates. Thunderbolt Ross, now the Red Hulk, willingly surrendered at the end of Brave New World, acknowledging he was a danger to the Republic. While he may have been transformed into a monstrous form, his future behind bars remains uncertain. Wonder Man debuted as a new adversary for Spider-Man. Although originally a villain, he later became a type of anti-hero and even briefly joined a team named after him. Ross also spent a short stint as an Avenger, showing how characters can evolve over time. The Raft's potential for storytelling remains vast, and fans can only hope that future projects explore the drama, tension, and unexpected alliances that could emerge from such a setting. In Avengers: Age of Ultron, John had a standout role reminiscent of Brave New World, portraying a character with both monstrous tendencies and moments of deep humanity. When asked if he would reprise the role, he expressed hope that the character could return in a meaningful way. "I hope he can come back. I hope there's a story in which he can develop into something beyond the Red Hook. I think we have the capacity to shift between hookness and humanity, but that's really not my department." Meanwhile, Rose's character appears to take a noble approach, choosing to keep himself distanced from society, while another man seems drawn to the depths of his own genius, embracing his darker ambitions. The film builds on events in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, following up on the first Avengers from 2012 while also referencing other background events that many viewers may not have seen or read about. The sequel throws the audience straight into the action, with the team already assembled on a mission against a Hydra base. Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Black Widow, and Hulk are back, working to stop Hydra's latest operations. While the film doesn't fully explore how the Avengers discovered the base or the experiments being conducted there, it's clear that Marvel has been laying the groundwork for these events over time. For fans who want background information on the events leading up to Age of Ultron, or for those who may have missed some of the prior releases in this 11-film franchise, the context is helpful. Director Nick Fury envisioned the Avengers Initiative as a plan to assemble extraordinary people during times of crisis, protecting the world from its greatest threats. The secretive organization S.H.I.E.L.D., Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division, is a high-tech global spy agency that maintained worldwide security after the Avengers first defended New York from Loki and his alien invasion. However, as revealed in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Hydra, a faction dating back to World War II, had spent decades infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. and various government agencies. By that time, Fury believed the organization no longer functioned as a global force and had been reduced to a small team of trusted operatives under Agent Coulson, who had been appointed the new director. This storyline is further explored in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series on ABC. After the events of Captain America: The Winter Soldier, a new light defense force was established to replace S.H.I.E.L.D. and manage the remaining Hydra forces returning to Earth. Tony Stark, also known as Iron Man, financed and equipped the Avengers from his personal resources, bringing the 6 heroes from the first film back together and setting up their base in Stark Tower. This served as their headquarters when Avengers: Age of Ultron began. By this point, the team had already undertaken numerous missions together. Hydra remained a threat, and all heroes had received upgrades to their field outfits and gear. Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, a relatively new villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was first introduced in the post-credits sequence of Captain America, the Winter Soldier. In Age of Ultron, we are also introduced to Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, who belong to Strucker's cell. They possess superpowers enhanced through experiments conducted on them by Hydra. Strucker is a high-ranking Hydra official, seemingly the top leader remaining, assisted by his right-hand man, Dr. List, a scientist who frequently appeared in the Marvel television series. The latest episode served as a prequel to Age of Ultron, showing SHIELD's efforts to eliminate Hydra remnants and uncover the presence of enhanced individuals, a top priority for Hydra. The series also introduced the concept of enhanced people, a theme that would become increasingly relevant in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch make their debut early in Avengers, Age of Ultron. While they are mutants in the original Marvel comics, legal restrictions prevented this explanation in the film. Instead, the Marvel TV series laid the groundwork for introducing enhanced individuals, or Inhumans, a hidden society of people with special abilities living among regular humans, who would eventually get their own film in 2019. Many early MCU films emphasized the importance and power of the Tesseract, also known as the Cosmic Cube, which became a key element in Captain America, the First Avenger. Everyone desired it, but none more so than Thanos, the overarching villain in the MCU. During the mid-credits of the Avengers, Thanos gave Loki the Mind Stone-embedded scepter to use in his invasion of Earth. After Loki's defeat, the scepter was taken by S.H.I.E.L.D. and stored safely. However, Baron von Strucker later recovered it at his base, where he used it to experiment on subjects in an attempt to create enhanced soldiers. This story connects with Season 2 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where Hydra continues its experiments and secretly develops enhanced individuals like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, while no one else survives the experiments. Avengers, Age of Ultron features Robert Downey Jr. returning as Iron Man, alongside Chris Evans as Captain America, Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, and Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye. The film also features Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, Don Cheadle as James War Machine Rhodes, Aaron Taylor Johnson as Quicksilver, and Elizabeth Olsen as Scarlet Witch. The film was released in theaters on May 1, 2015. It was followed by Ant-Man on July 17, 2015, Captain America, Civil War on May 6, 2016, and Doctor Strange on November 4, 2016. Following the events of the Avengers, Thor, The Dark World, and Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Age of Ultron finds Earth's heroes on a mission to locate and secure alien technology that has fallen into the wrong hands. This mission leads Iron Man, Captain America, Black Widow, Hulk, and Hawkeye to Baron Strucker, a Hydra officer who has been experimenting with Loki's scepter in hopes of harnessing its power at a secret compound. The Avengers encounter enhanced twins, Pietro and Wanda Maximoff, as well as scientific discoveries that, when combined with Tony Stark's advances in artificial intelligence, create the potential to protect the world from future alien invasions. However, this effort leads to the creation of Ultron, a powerful artificial intelligence who believes that humanity itself is the greatest threat to peace. Although Ant-Man serves as a lighter solo outing, Age of Ultron effectively closes the door on Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe while opening several windows into Phase 3. The film delivers everything fans expect from a Marvel movie: globe-trotting adventure, large-scale battles, future shared universe setup, comic book spectacle, concise character drama, and even a fun Stan Lee cameo. As a result, it is a must-see for viewers who have been following Marvel's interconnected storyline. With refined special effects, a new central villain, and deeper character development, the movie raises the stakes. However, some viewers feel that the groundwork for future events, particularly Civil War, makes the film slightly less accessible for those unfamiliar with the ongoing storyline. Like its predecessor, it occasionally struggles to balance its large cast of returning heroes. Still, the core storyline successfully builds on previous films and highlights each hero's individual struggles: physical, intellectual, and emotional. Wanda's powers, especially her ability to manipulate minds, force the Avengers to confront their deepest fears and darker selves. Most of the cast, especially actors who have headlined solo films, deliver strong performances filled with humorous one-liners, sincere personal drama, and powerful superhero moments. Interestingly, some of the most compelling scenes come from characters who have not led solo films. The evolving dynamic between Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff adds emotional depth, while the Hulk provides a surprisingly touching mirror for Black Widow to reflect on her troubled past and the person she hopes to become. Nevertheless, one of the film's biggest surprises is previously sidelined Avenger Clint Barton. Clint Barton, also known as Hawkeye, is given a much more meaningful and relatable role in Age of Ultron. In the Avengers, Barton spent much of the story under mind control. Here, he becomes a grounded and human presence, serving as an emotional anchor for both the team and the audience. Newcomers Aaron Taylor-Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen deliver bold performances as Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Despite the well-received portrayal of Quicksilver by Evan Peters in X-Men, Days of Future Past, Taylor-Johnson's version feels distinct enough to stand on its own. His powers and personality bring fresh energy, even if some aspects remain familiar. Scarlet Witch adds emotional weight and visual flair to the film's action sequences. However, while the larger story hints at more exciting developments ahead, many viewers may find themselves more interested in what Wanda's inclusion means for the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe than in her limited screen time here. The twins' backstory and the origin of their powers are only briefly explained, and their connection to Ultron could have been explored more deeply. This lack of detailed world-building is a recurring issue in some Marvel films. As a villain, Ultron is visually impressive and more developed than some previous antagonists. Voiced by James Spader, Ultron brings wit and personality to the role. However, despite his strong presence, he sometimes feels more like a plot device designed to push the Avengers in new directions rather than a fully enduring villain. Even so, Age of Ultron remains one of the most exciting and entertaining entries in the franchise. Like Captain America, the Winter Soldier, it features impressive visuals and large-scale action sequences. While certain environments and effects occasionally appear overly CGI-heavy, the filmmakers successfully deliver bigger, more sophisticated battles and an epic overall spectacle, complete with another memorable musical theme by Brian Tyler and Danny Elfman. For that reason, the film is especially worth watching in premium formats such as 3D and IMAX 3D, where the scale of the action truly stands out. Despite a few narrative hiccups and uneven pacing, Avengers: Age of Ultron is solid popcorn entertainment and best experienced on the biggest screen possible. While the novelty of seeing multiple comic book heroes together was more groundbreaking in the first Avengers film, this sequel successfully expands the shared universe and sets the stage for future conflicts. The film runs for 141 minutes and is rated PG-13 for intense sequences of sci-fi action and violence, destruction, and some suggestive comments. It was released in 2D, 3D, and IMAX 3D formats. Age of Ultron also plays an important role in the larger Infinity Saga. The journeys of characters like Thor and Loki have been interconnected since the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Thor became one of the MCU's central heroes, and despite Loki's repeated deaths, both characters remained significant throughout the saga. It almost became an unspoken rule that Thor and Loki would continue appearing together in future MCU stories. Looking back at the Infinity Saga, there is an interesting trend involving Thor and Loki. Throughout most of the saga, the Asgardian brothers appeared together in the same films. They shared the screen in the Avengers: Thor, The Dark World, Thor, Ragnarok, Avengers, Infinity War, and Avengers, Endgame. However, Avengers: Age of Ultron is the only Infinity Saga film in which Thor appears without Loki. This broke the ongoing pattern of the brothers sharing major MCU appearances. Originally, Loki was planned to appear in Age of Ultron. Tom Hiddleston even filmed a cameo that would have featured Loki appearing in a nightmare sequence created by Scarlet Witch. However, the scene was ultimately cut during post-production. According to Hiddleston, audiences during test screenings were confused and believed Loki's appearance in Thor's vision meant he was somehow controlling Ultron. Because Loki's scepter played such an important role in the sequel, this misunderstanding led the filmmakers to remove the cameo. Since then, the multiverse saga has continued to separate Thor and Loki's storylines, much like Age of Ultron did. This has created a growing desire among fans to see the two reunite in a future MCU project. With Loki's continued development in the Disney Plus series Loki, a reunion remains possible in future Avengers films. Although Avengers: Age of Ultron is often considered the weakest installment in the Avengers team-up series, holding a 76% score on Rotten Tomatoes, it played a crucial role in shaping the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. While some criticism focused on its crowded storyline and uneven pacing, the film allowed several important character arcs to develop, which later paid off in future entries. The movie deserves more appreciation for the groundwork it laid. Without it, key moments in later films would not have had the same impact. For example, it foreshadowed Vision's philosophical stance and hinted at Wanda Maximoff's transformation into the Scarlet Witch. It even subtly set up Captain America's defining moment in Endgame. Most importantly, Age of Ultron serves as a direct precursor to Captain America: Civil War. Throughout the film, tensions rise between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers due to their differing philosophies. Tony secretly creates Ultron in an attempt to protect the world, but when the artificial intelligence turns against humanity, the consequences are devastating. Cities are destroyed, lives are lost, and trust within the team begins to fracture. Their ideological divide becomes clear during intense conversations, particularly at Clint Barton's home, where the team debates responsibility, protection, and accountability. Tony's desire to use technology as a safeguard clashes with Steve's belief in personal freedom and moral restraint. These disagreements ultimately lead to the Sokovia Accords conflict in Civil War, where Iron Man and Captain America find themselves on opposing sides. While Age of Ultron only hints at this divide, it plants the seeds for one of the most emotionally powerful conflicts in the MCU. In hindsight, Avengers: Age of Ultron may not be the strongest Avengers film, but it is one of the most important. It bridges Phase 2 and Phase 3, deepens character arcs, and sets in motion events that define both the Infinity Saga and beyond. It meant waiting several more years to see certain storylines fully unfold on the big screen, but that patience proved rewarding. Wanda Maximoff has since become one of the MCU's most beloved characters because of her complexity and emotional depth. Age of Ultron introduced her telekinetic and mind manipulation powers, but it took time for her tragic journey to fully take shape. The film foreshadowed Wanda's incredible strength, hinting that she would one day become one of the most powerful Avengers. In particular, the final battle, where she unleashes her full power against Ultron's remaining forces, gave audiences a glimpse of her true potential. Wanda's tragedy begins with the death of her brother, Pietro Maximoff. From that moment on, her losses continue to mount. The accidental destruction in Lagos during Captain America: Civil War and her painful experiences in Avengers: Infinity War only deepen her loneliness and heartbreak. These devastating events ultimately shape her transformation into the Scarlet Witch in WandaVision and set her down a darker path in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. One of the most important elements of Age of Ultron is the series of visions Wanda creates for each Avenger. By manipulating their minds, she forces them to confront their deepest fears, desires, and unresolved trauma. Tony Stark is the first to experience one of these haunting visions. He sees a future where the Avengers are defeated and Earth lies in ruin. This vision plays directly into his fear of failure, a fear that has haunted him since the Battle of New York in the Avengers. Tony has been dealing with PTSD ever since, and his recurring anxiety about everyone dying explains why he created Ultron in the first place. Tragically, his fears partially come true in Infinity War when Thanos wipes out half the universe. Tony's vision reveals that beneath the genius billionaire persona is a man desperate to protect humanity and the people he loves. Ultimately, this motivation leads to his final sacrifice in Avengers: Endgame, where he saves the universe and finds peace. Similarly, Thor experiences a troubling vision foretelling the fall of Asgard. His nightmare hints at the coming Ragnarok prophecy, which would later unfold in Thor, Ragnarok. Although Ragnarok proves inevitable, Thor ultimately manages to save his people and relocate the survivors to Earth. His vision in Age of Ultron sets the stage for this transformation and reinforces his responsibility as protector of the Nine Realms. The film also subtly lays the groundwork for Black Panther by introducing Ulysses Klaue and referencing the rare and powerful metal vibranium. Vibranium, the material used to create Captain America's shield, becomes a central element in future MCU stories. Age of Ultron hints at the global demand and illegal smuggling of vibranium, which later plays a major role in the politics and conflicts surrounding Wakanda. Another powerful vision belongs to Natasha Romanoff. Her nightmare takes her back to the Red Room, where she was trained and conditioned to become a Black Widow assassin. The film offers audiences a deeper look into her traumatic past, intense training, psychological conditioning, and the painful sacrifices required to graduate from the program. This emotional glimpse adds depth to Natasha's character and helps explain her guarded personality and surge for redemption. Natasha's vision in Age of Ultron eventually sets up a larger storyline surrounding the Black Widow program. The Red Room, the manipulative and brutal training system that created her, remains active, and stopping it later becomes an important objective. The film hints at the darker parts of Natasha's past, which are explored more deeply in Black Widow. By expanding on her trauma and history, the MCU gives greater emotional weight to her character. Clint Barton's greatest strength is also his greatest vulnerability, his family. Because he has a wife and children, anything that threatens them puts him in a uniquely emotional position. This becomes devastatingly clear in Avengers: Endgame, when the snap wipes out his entire family. Overcome with grief, Clint adopts the ruthless persona of Ronin. Although his family is eventually restored, the MCU has only recently begun exploring the deeper emotional consequences of that loss. Captain America's vision is different from the others. While most Avengers experience dark fears or traumatic memories, Steve Rogers sees a peaceful, heartwarming moment, dancing with Peggy Carter. This vision references Captain America, the first Avenger, where Steve promises Peggy a dance that never happens because he sacrifices himself and is frozen in ice for nearly 70 years. The vision represents the life he lost. In a touching full-circle moment, Endgame fulfills this promise. After returning the Infinity Stones, Steve chooses to stay in the past and finally share that long-awaited dance with Peggy. The music used in his vision in Age of Ultron reappears in Endgame, bringing emotional closure to his journey. After years of fighting, he earns the peaceful life he was denied. Marvel fans have also long speculated about the significance of the phrase Endgame. Interestingly, Age of Ultron marks one of its earliest uses in the MCU. Tony Stark uses the term while explaining his desire to create a global defense system, an ultimate solution to protect Earth. Years later, the word becomes the title of Avengers: Endgame, symbolizing the final battle against Thanos. In Avengers: Infinity War, Doctor Strange famously tells Tony that they are now in the endgame, after seeing millions of possible futures and only one path to victory. Though Tony first spoke the word, Strange gives it its ultimate meaning. Age of Ultron begins with the Avengers: Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, seemingly at the height of their unity. After defeating Hydra forces and retrieving Loki's scepter, they appear ready for some well-earned peace. However, Tony's attempt to build an artificial intelligence defense system meant to protect the world goes horribly wrong. His creation, Ultron, becomes a self-aware machine that believes true peace can only be achieved by eliminating humanity. Thus, what begins as an effort to save the world nearly leads to its destruction. In trying to create a suit of armor around the Earth, Tony instead unleashes one of the Avengers' most dangerous enemies. The original Avengers film was widely praised for successfully bringing together Marvel's biggest superheroes. Much of its drama and humor came from watching these powerful individuals learn how to function as a unified team. In comparison, Age of Ultron faces a greater challenge. Writer and director Joss Whedon had already explored the tensions and personality clashes that arise when iconic comic book heroes are forced to work together. Instead of repeating that formula, Ultron attempts to deepen the characters' interpersonal relationships. The film finds its greatest emotional success in the tentative romantic connection between Black Widow and Bruce Banner. Their relationship is complicated and fragile, largely because of Banner's inability to control his rage and his transformation into the Hulk. Both characters recognize how difficult, and potentially dangerous, their bond could be, which adds emotional weight to their scenes together. Like the 2012 installment, the sequel must balance a large ensemble cast. Not only does it need to give each hero meaningful screen time, but it must also provide emotional depth so that individual fans feel satisfied. Tony Stark once again struggles with guilt over his family's legacy as weapons manufacturers. Captain America continues to embody moral decency and unwavering principles. As if those internal conflicts were not enough, the Avengers are further destabilized by the arrival of Wanda and Pietro Maximoff. Scarlet Witch uses her mind control abilities to manipulate the team from within, exploiting their psychological weaknesses. Their fragile unity begins to crack, forcing the heroes to question whether they truly deserve to protect the world. Meanwhile, Ultron presents a philosophical challenge as well as a physical threat. He claims he does not want to prevent peace but to achieve it permanently, even if that requires mass destruction. The film briefly touches on the moral implications of artificial intelligence, responsibility, and unintended consequences, though these themes are not explored as deeply as they could have been. With so many characters juggling personal struggles, the emotional payoff is occasionally uneven. However, the film shines in quieter moments, such as the extended farmhouse sequence at Clint Barton's home, where the Avengers are forced to pause and reflect. These scenes reveal how the team functions when not engaged in battle and emphasize their humanity beneath the superhero personas. The actors, now fully comfortable in their roles, lean into their characters' defining traits. Robert Downey Jr. continues to portray Tony Stark with sharp intelligence and wit. Chris Evans maintains Captain America's steadfast honor and leadership. Chris Hemsworth brings Thor's regal presence and subtle humor to the role. Some of the strongest performances come from Mark Ruffalo and Scarlett Johansson, whose chemistry gives Banner and Natasha a surprising emotional depth. Meanwhile, Hawkeye, armed with only a bow and arrow, once again proves that he can stand alongside gods and super soldiers through bravery and determination alone. Ultron himself, voiced by James Spader, delivers a performance filled with dry sarcasm and unsettling calm. Designed in Tony Stark's image, Ultron reflects his creator's wit, but without his humanity. That contrast ultimately becomes one of the film's most compelling elements. After all, Ultron is very much a machine of Tony Stark's design, his brainchild, and in many ways, he reflects Stark's personality, brilliant, arrogant, and morally complex. Ultron's wit and intelligence make him a compelling antagonist, capable of challenging the Avengers both physically and philosophically. While he lacks true empathy, his character raises important questions about responsibility, power, and the consequences of unchecked creation. Ultron's dialogue is sharp and clever, without ever feeling overly cute or forced. James Spader delivers a performance that balances menace with dry humor, giving audiences a villain who is both terrifying and entertaining. In contrast, some viewers may find the performances of Aaron Taylor-Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen less compelling. Their heavy European accents can sometimes be distracting, though their characters still add crucial emotional stakes to the story. From the very first frame, the film delivers high-octane action. Ultron and the Avengers engage in spectacular battles, full of flying, explosions, and large-scale destruction. While the abundance of CGI in these sequences occasionally makes the action feel less grounded, it is still thrilling to watch. The characters often banter or trade quips in the heat of combat, which adds levity but also highlights the unreal scale of some sequences. Despite these occasional distractions, the film succeeds in making the stakes feel real. Ultron's threat is existential. The machine's final plan suggests that the entire human race could be wiped out in an instant. This raises tension and gives emotional weight to the Avengers' mission. The film reminds audiences that even in a world of superhumans, the consequences of failure are devastatingly human. Overall, Ultron is a clever, menacing antagonist, and the film balances humor, character dynamics, and spectacle in a way that keeps audiences engaged, even when the CGI-heavy battles push the limits of realism.